ready for a deep dive that's going to take us out of this world.
Out of this world, huh? I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
We are talking space snacks today.
Okay.
But not just any snacks. We're talking about Doritos boldly going where, frankly, no chip has gone before.
Really?
And we're going to dive into the wild science behind how being in space can totally mess with how you taste, well, everything.
It's way more than just keeping those astronaut tummies happy, though.
Right.
This stuff actually ties into some seriously fascinating research about our senses, like how our brains work and how we experience something as basic as food, not just up in space, but right here on Earth, too.
Okay, so Doritos in space.
Yeah.
This seems like something that, I don't know, like should have happened ages ago.
Right.
Right, like we got astronaut ice cream, we got freeze-dried this and that, why not chips?
You'd think, right.
Right.
But for like almost 60 years, chips in space. Huge no-no.
Really?
Big time.
Why? What's the deal?
Crumbs.
Crumbs?
Seriously.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of, I don't know, a little dramatic. No, not at all. Imagine this. Tiny Doritos particles, right? They got that cheesy, flavorful dust all over them, just floating around a spacecraft.
In zero gravity.
Zero G, exactly. They get into instruments, clog the air vents.
Oh, yeah.
Not exactly what you want in such a delicate and crazy expensive environment.
No, not at all. So no chips for astronauts all these years. What did they eat?
NASA, they had to get creative.
Yeah.
Early days. Bite-sized bread cubes instead of regular slices. Less crumbly, you see.
Okay.
Even today, they use things like pepper oil, salt water, instead of ground spices. Keeps things tidy.
That honestly sounds incredibly bland.
Right.
No wonder astronauts seem so stoked to get back to Earth food.
I bet.
Okay, but if chips were totally off limits, how'd Doritos finally make it to space?
This is where things get really interesting. Doritos, they developed a special kind of chip just for space.
Hold on, space Doritos?
Cool Ranch Zero Gravity, they call it.
Now that I gotta try. What's different about them?
Two big things. First, they're minis. Bite-sized, less crumbly, you know the drill.
Right. Gotta contain those crumbs.
But second, instead of that powdery flavor dust, they use an oil-based flavoring. Doesn't go floating off in microgravity.
That is seriously clever. So how'd these space Doritos actually make it up there? Was NASA involved?
Not this time, actually.
No.
Doritos teamed up with the Polaris Dawn mission.
Polaris Dawn.
All-private mission, used a SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. They were doing some groundbreaking stuff. First ever commercial spacewalk, reached a record-breaking altitude, higher than any human spaceflight since 1966. Oh, and they just happened to be the first folks to munch on Doritos in space.
That's a heck of a milestone for a chip.
Right.
It really shows you how much work, how much thought goes into every tiny detail of space travel. So Polaris Dawn, who are these people?
Led by Jared Isaacman. He's a billionaire entrepreneur, and there were 3 other private astronauts with him.
Okay, so they're making history with spacewalks, hitting new heights, and they decide, hey, let's bring Doritos along for the ride.
Sounds about right, yeah.
Tell me they at least shot a commercial while they were up there.
And they did.
Yeah.
First ever ad filmed in space featured the Polaris Dawn crew enjoying their zero chips. But it wasn't just for fun, though.
No.
The mission partnered with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital.
Oh, wow.
Doritos fans could donate and get limited edition canisters of these space-worthy chips.
That's awesome.
Right.
Cool way to support a good cause and get a little taste of space.
So what the astronauts actually think of the chips? Like, do they actually taste good in zero gravity?
Astronaut Anna Menon, she said they held up incredibly well.
Okay.
Said they had that, quote, unique flavor, but also reminiscent of Doritos on Earth. High praise.
That is pretty impressive. It makes you wonder, if they're putting this much effort into making space-worthy chips, what does that tell us about how our sense of taste actually works in space?
You've hit on a really important point. See, it's not as simple as, oh, the food tastes different because it's been freeze-dried or whatever.
Right. There's a whole bunch of research coming out now that says the environment of space itself, especially the isolation, can seriously change how our brains process flavor.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's not just the food, it's the isolation that's messing with your taste buds.
It's wild, right?
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
So tell me more about this research. How do you even study something like how isolation messes with your taste in space?
It's tricky for sure.
Yeah.
One study, though, from RMIT University, they focused on recreating that International Space Station environment.
Okay.
But like here on Earth, they wanted to study how being isolated, how we see the space around us, spatial perception, all ties into how we smell certain things like vanilla, almond, lemon, those kinds of scents.
Okay, so they brought space down to Earth for this study. How'd they do that?
Virtual reality. mainly.
Ah, okay.
They use these VR goggles to make a super realistic simulation of the ISS.
Gotcha.
Like you'd feel the cramped space, the limited sensory input, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
And they had people smell these different scents, rate how strong they were, all while they were in this simulation.
That's wild. And what'd they find? Like, did being in that fake space environment actually change how people smelled those things?
That's the crazy part. It did.
Really?
Vanilla and almond. Those aromas seemed way stronger in the ISS simulation than in a normal room. Lemon stayed the same.
Oh, wow. So what is it about vanilla and almond that made them, like, pop? Why wasn't lemon affected by this fake isolation thing?
Researchers, they think it might be because of something called benzaldehyde.
Benzaldehyde.
Yeah, it's in both vanilla and almond. Apparently, it plays a part in how we understand our environment.
Interesting.
So it's possible that when our brains are in a weird, unfamiliar place, like when we're isolated, they kind of latch onto these familiar, safe scents more strongly. Makes sense, right?
So our brains are trying to figure out this strange environment, and these familiar comforting smells kind of jump out.
Exactly.
It's like a survival thing almost, I guess.
Could be. But what's really cool is it shows how connected all this stuff is. Our sense of smell, our environment, even like what's going on in our head psychologically, it all plays into how we experience something as basic as taste. And who knows? This study, it focused on vanilla, almond, lemon, sure. But what about everything else? How does where we are, in a much bigger sense, shape how we experience the world through our senses?
Yeah.
But a huge question.
Okay, I see what you're saying. It's not just about being in a spaceship anymore. What about, like, people in submarines or research stations in Antarctica, even folks who are just, like, lonely right here at home?
Exactly.
Yeah.
This research, it's got implications way beyond space travel. Imagine if we could use this knowledge, right?
Yeah.
To make custom diets for people who are isolated.
Oh, wow.
Maybe we could help them eat better, feel a little less lonely, just by tweaking what's on their plate.
So someone in a nursing home, for example, might have a better meal and actually eat more just because someone thought about, like, their environment and how their senses might be different because of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about making food taste better. Food, it can be really powerful.
Right.
Especially in tough situations.
Yeah.
It can boost morale, lower stress, even help people feel less alone.
It's true. We do underestimate the power of a good meal sometimes, especially when you're in a weird or isolating place. This really changes how we think about space food, doesn't it?
Totally. It's not just about keeping astronauts alive and functioning. It's about their mental game, too,
Yeah.
And as we've been talking about, the stuff we learn trying to figure that out up in space, it can actually help people back here on Earth, too.
It really blows my mind, honestly. The amount of thought that goes into every little thing for space travel, even something as, I don't know, basic as food.
It's way more complex than people realize. And as we're looking at longer missions, to Mars and even further out, designing food systems for astronauts, that's critical. Got to make sure it's nutritious, sustainable, the whole deal.
So what are we talking? Like space farms, zero-gravity kitchens, that kind of thing?
Well, maybe not zero-G kitchens just yet, but space farming, definitely on the table. They're looking into hydroponics.
Hydroponics.
Yeah, and other ways to actually grow fresh food right there on spacecraft. Fruits, veggies, even grains, you name it.
Wow, so we went from space Doritos to full-on space gardens. That's a big jump. What's the reason for this push towards fresh food in space, though?
It goes beyond just giving astronauts some variety and tastier meals.
Okay.
Turns out there's a big psychological benefit to fresh food, especially on those super long missions.
Yeah, I can see that. Like bringing a little bit of Earth with them on these long journeys. I bet that does wonders for their mental health, being able to, like, care for something that's alive and growing.
Exactly. Imagine tending to your little space garden millions of miles from home. Gives you a sense of purpose, routine, connections to something beyond just the mission.
That's actually kind of beautiful. But let's come back down to Earth here for a sec, or at least back to the realities of eating in space. Zero gravity. Gotta be a pain when it comes to food, right?
Oh, for sure.
Mm.
Food doesn't exactly stay put in zero-G.
Mhm.
Researchers are working on some really cool stuff, though, like edible films.
Edible films. But like no more floating food crumbs, just futuristic invisible food wrappers.
Exactly. These films, they help hold ingredients together, which means less mess, less waste. And that's huge for these long missions. Got to be sustainable.
This is incredible. All the stuff you have to think about when it comes to space food. It's like cutting edge science meets technology meets like culinary arts.
Right. It's a trip. And it's always changing, you know? We learn more about how our bodies work, the challenges of being up in space, how important food is for our minds and bodies.
So before we finish up our deep dive here into space snacks, space taste, the whole shebang, what's the biggest thing you're taking away from all this?
Honestly, it reminds me that exploration, even when it comes to something as, I don't know, as fun as food, it can lead to these huge discoveries that change how we do things down here on Earth.
Yeah.
Like, who knew that wanting a good crunchy chip in space could lead to breakthroughs in understanding our senses, helping people who are isolated eat better, even designing totally new food systems for the future? It's wild.
It shows you that food, it's way more than just fuel, right? It's comfort, it's connection. It can even be the key to some really incredible scientific discoveries.
Totally.
And as we keep pushing those boundaries, who knows what other surprising and delicious breakthroughs are waiting for us. This has been fascinating. Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
Anytime.
Oh.
Always up for a good space snack chat.